Masculinity, is it misunderstood? What is it meant to be a man? Is it something that evolves over time? Has feminism played a role in how men see themselves? Has it been helpful? Has it been damaging? What's meant by toxic masculinity? How do young men start their journeys towards becoming better individuals or as a collective? We're going to be discussing all that and more straight after this.
Right, welcome back to another episode of Bedos Media. We have with us Brother Razwan Faraz. Now, before we get into this conversation, Assalamu alaikum, by the way, Razwan.
Wa alaikum salam.
Before we get into this conversation, I'm going to start off by playing a short video and then get your feedback. Maybe do a little reaction on it. I think it's going to be interesting. This was sent to me by Safraz Ali, who we interviewed on this platform not too long ago.
Kind of dushman in our lives and we have to unite once again to fight it. Problem ye hai, there are too many mard log these days who are walking around with long hair, waxed legs and shaved chests. Men today are spending more times in beauty parlors than in gyms where they belong. Ye mard sirf naam ke hain. Ye cooking karna chahte hain. They want to look after babies, get their hair permed and their face steamed. They want to feel like bhenjis, wear clothes like bhenjis, put on cream and lotions like bhenjis. They even choose colors that are feminine. Tell me, yaar, what is wrong with you guys who want to wear purple, pink and mauve? ये manly नहीं है यार, girly है. भारत के मर्दों, we are in danger, losing our gift, manliness. So let's not grow long hair like shampoo models. Let's not perm our hair or use curlers in our hair. Let's not shave or wax our legs and chest. Let's grow beards and stubbles. Let's keep long sideburns. Let's not wear silk pants but scruffy jeans. Let's not learn how to pakao Thai food and dance salsa. Let's instead khao Thai food and dance bhangra. Let's not wear pink and purple shirts, baba, but blue, black and grey shirts, like a mud should. Let's not move around in girly scooterettes, but motorcycles. Let's fix our own plumbing and jam doors and windows. Let's watch cricket and football on TV and not stupid serials about in-laws. Let's keep bulldogs and labradors as pets and not Pomeranians and poodles. Let's not have anything to do with facial and lip gloss and hand cream and counting calories and flowery perfumes or flowery anything. But most of all, let us not drink silly, pink cocktails and sissy beers. Let's only drink Hayward's 5000.
Okay, I'll stop it there. That's obviously an advert, but it was, I think, representative of a mindset, a certain thought. Agree or not agree?
Well, I would say that it is prevalent to a degree in certain places to consider masculinity to have a definition where anything that veers away from that idea of what it means to be a man is then challenged. Things like wearing pink shirts, things like looking after yourself, is something that's seen to be unmanly. But perhaps the question has to be, what does masculinity actually mean before we actually think about whether
100%.
it's even misunderstood?
Absolutely. So let's start off with that, because I think that's going to be the premise of the whole discussion, isn't it? What is meant to be a man?
Well,
It's in there.
What does it mean to you guys? I mean, is masculinity synonymous to what it means to be a man? When you think of masculinity, do you think man?
I think it's a good question. In different cultures, it would be interpreted in different ways. It's a lot of this is going to be subjective, but masculinity certainly points towards manly attributes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Manly attribute. Well, that would be masculine attributes, then, isn't it?
Well, then we're going in a circle, aren't we?
Yeah.
Describe to me. I tell you why I'm asking these questions, because when we question whether masculinity is misunderstood or men are misunderstood, it's important to create the distinction between these words which are branded around. And typically, man equals masculinity is what is seen to be a very common idea that people hold. So masculinity is seen to be what belongs to men, and femininity seems to be what belongs to women. So the more feminine you are, the better of a woman you are, is the suggestion. The more masculine you are, the better of a man you are. That if you're dealing with problems in life, or if you're suffering in life, then actually you're not being masculine enough. So when you think of masculine, what qualities come to mind?
I'm not sure that relates, but it's said that if you're having problems in life, you're not masculine enough. In all honesty, other than, I don't know, perhaps some sort of feminist movements, or some form of extremist or the other on either side, I've never really come across that. It's an interesting one, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think people who are masculine or man or manly, can't have problems or issues in their life.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's not the point that I was making, though. The suggestion I made was that when problems do occur, the notion is that you need to be more masculine to get through them, or you need to man up to get through them. This notion. Those who still have very apparent, even socially accepted ideas of masculinity, that they will still have issues, but those issues aren't necessarily seen to be related to the lack of masculinity. So a question just to pose to yourself, so that we can perhaps bring the audience into this conversation, is what are the characteristics that masculinity embodies? So if you were to say somebody who has very healthy, let's start with that, healthy masculinity. If you believe you can have healthy masculinity, which I do, what are those qualities that you would consider to be healthy masculinity?
Well, it depends on how you're defining masculinity, Rizwan. If you give the audience the understanding, or if you're going to explain what you mean by masculinity, then I'm sure the audience can answer from their point of view how they feel about the question itself.
Okay, so masculinity itself is typically seen as certain qualities and behaviors that are usually wrapped around the way men behave. And so what you have is ambition, risk-taking, being, as is being shared in the comments, being protective in your nature, somebody who is a go-getter, somebody who is an achiever. These are typically seen as masculine traits, somebody who is strong-minded, strong, considered to be rational, and all of these behaviors.
By who?
However, but in terms of how we typically, I'm talking about the behaviors here, but these are behaviors that are observed in all genders.
No, what I mean is, by who are these attributes associated to masculinity? I mean, am I just asking, is this like your personal observation, or is it something that you've come across in particular research articles or something like that?
Well, if you just look at the etymology of the word masculinity itself, I mean, literally just means of men, of the male sex, right? So it essentially means that it's referring to the male itself in terms of what that is referring to, the qualities of the male sex, physically or mentally, in that sense. And it's usually referring to the notion of there's some sort of power or some sort of centrality around that power itself. Now, perhaps the assumption here I'm making is that maybe there is a resistance here in terms of understanding what masculinity is. But there is a commonality, I guess, in terms of what we observe around what masculinity is, and then what are those behaviors. Personally, if I were to just share what my own thoughts are, is that masculinity is a certain wrapping of qualities that are available and accessible to both men and women. I would call them energies if you want to. The term masculinity, although it's used in such a way, when people say, oh, you're, to a woman, or you're being very masculine in your behavior, what they're suggesting, if we were to look at it, they're suggesting that you're being more male-like, as opposed to you have got certain qualities that should be celebrated. So when a man is behaving in a certain way and they say you're being very feminine, the suggestion is you're being very female-like, as opposed to in a celebratory way that you are exhibiting certain qualities of nurture, of being protective, of being somebody who has marked out their territory and is able to essentially protect within from a feminine perspective, a nurturing perspective that we see. Now, I mean, come in, into any of this. We as humans have a mother and a father, and that's the first, first experience most of us have with what is a man and what is a woman. Carl Jung talks about the imago as the first impression that you have of a male typically is given to you or distorted by your father. And the first impression you have of a woman is typically given to you or distorted to you by your mother. Whether it's the lack of their presence, whether it's the overindulgence of what they give to you, or in some cases, even whether it's the abuse that may occur by these two characters that are primary to your initial dependency state, because we're born without any consciousness. None of us remember the day that we're born, and there's some point when we begin to think, okay, my memory came at a certain point, whether you're 1.5, 2, 3, 4 years old, and then through experience, you begin to learn how to navigate through life itself. And so in some ways, one of the things I've come to appreciate is that we're all made up of certain qualities that are accessible to us. If we lean on one more than the other and we become locked into those qualities, typically if we see them as masculinity, for example, whatever masculinity is, let's just for a moment accept that masculinity are certain qualities around ambition, around risk-taking, around being strong. Those qualities are not exclusive, in my opinion, to the male, to the man. They're not exclusive to him.
Yeah, agree.
They are completely accessible by women, and arguably a healthy individual knows how to oscillate and move according to the context that they're in to whichever qualities they need to then exhibit. So for example, if a child comes to you, your child, and they are very upset, as a father, we can sometimes, even mothers, we can typically reprimand them, criticize them, and we've done this and I've done this. But at that moment in time, maybe the child requires understanding. Maybe they don't even require any wisdom or any teaching. They just simply require for you to sit with them and help them feel safe again.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are we saying though? Is that not? So are we saying that's a feminine trait then?
No, I don't. I would say that in terms of the usage of the word feminine and masculine is, in my observance, wrongfully been used and attributed to man and woman, which then means that certain behaviors are seen. If we give the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Islam was someone who overtly cried openly in the prayers. If I were to speak to you of an individual who cries 4 or 5 times a day, now, you probably, the first thing to come to mind wouldn't be that this is a very strong, healthy individual, because our experiences of individuals that cry, if I would say about a man who cries 4 or 5 times a day, we wouldn't typically, because we're not used to that. The average of the number of times that we have observed and experienced men crying is so low that such an example would make us think, hang on a second, is this a healthy male? And yet we know the Prophet would cry all the time. Why? Because that was something that was a healthy way to express himself to his Lord and to the people that were loved ones before him. Similarly,
sorry. Well, sorry, just to interject. So obviously, look, if we were to hear of an individual that was to cry maybe 5 times a day, based on that alone, we would think, or, you know, whether we should or shouldn't judge or make an assumption of that person. But because we know so much more about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, we know that he led men in battle. We know he traveled. We know he traded. We know, you know, he wrestled. We know so many other things. Now, if we knew such a man in today's time, who, you know, was trained in combat, who was a wrestler, who, you know, had all these other qualities or characteristics, and then we learned that, you know, when he prays or when he connects with his Lord, he gets emotional or he even cries. Do you see the difference there?
Yeah. So, but what you're giving is added context, and I deliberately didn't give the context to just elicit a particular thought pattern around how we consider men who cry, or how we consider, for example, women who are very strong. There are certain labels, and we can't ignore the fact that there are certain labels that are attributed to the way certain behaviors manifest. If a woman is very strong-minded, how is she seen? Is she seen as someone who is bitchy, for example? Or is she actually seen as someone who should be respected because she knows herself enough to be able to hold her ground? And actually, gender should not even come into the question. I mean, in terms of who defines what it means to be a man. So when we look at, is masculinity misunderstood? It's a question you've posed, which is why I'm posing back to yourself. What do you mean by masculinity? Because to me, masculinity in some way is like what Carl Jung would say, is that every single one of us in our psyche is born with what is, and these are the terms that I more closely resonate with, is the anima and the animus. That within us, there are certain behaviors. The anima is what we see as the feminine, and the animus is what we see as the masculine traits. And according to him, he suggests, and what I've observed and seen and begun to nurture within myself, is that these are all accessible to us, and it's healthy to be able to dip into them as expressions from within, as opposed to the notion that in order to be a strong individual, I have to be around strong individuals. Of course, that helps to unlock it, but when you believe in fitrah from an Islamic perspective, or from a psychology perspective, the notion of archetypal structures that you inherit within your DNA, the psychology of your soul is not born empty. There is no tabula rasa. It's not like an empty tablet that's written on through life's experiences. It's actually something, there is a structure to you that makes us human. We've inherited it as humans, that makes us all be able to have the warrior spirit, to be able to have the lover spirit, to be able to have the king spirit. These are all accessible to us as both men and women, that we can be able to do that. So to be able to be decisive as an individual, there are social influences, don't get me wrong. There are social influences that nurture certain qualities when we allow certain things to happen. The simple thing of watch the film Titanic. Why is it that, you know, women and children have to go first? What's the thinking behind that? The thinking behind that is supposedly positive, in that we should rescue the women and children because they're vulnerable. But what does it also say to the men who are left behind? That actually you're sacrificial, that you should be sacrificed for humanity. So now we then have this almost a martyr complex, that I've got to sacrifice myself for others at my own expense, as opposed to let me give from what I have, but never at my own expense. Because what kind of community wants you to sacrifice at your own expense?
It's not just communities, is it? It's not just communities, is it? I mean, you know, you look at relationships between men and women, and there's somehow happens to be the unsaid law of relationships that the man is going to be the one who sacrifices more to you know, provide for the family, to be able to make sure the family is okay, for the woman, you know, there are, I'm just thinking out loud here. And what I'm trying to do is put context to what you've said, or try to relate it to different situations. Now, you've made it a point about the scenes from the Titanic movie. Interesting observations there, and an interesting point to pick there. I'm just thinking about how when sometimes you have men and women who have relationship problems, and where they stem from and where they come from. And you know, sometimes they lead to undesired results based on not getting what they expected to get. I guess this conversation can then lean towards expectations of what's fair to be expected and whatnot. And then you come to a circle again about discovering, well, basically, you need to understand who you are and what you have to give in the first place, and make that clear before you can expect somebody to expect something for you. But yeah, in a roundabout way, I think a lot of this is going to be determined by the circumstances. Now, if, for example, I'm just putting myself in that situation of the Titanic movie that you mentioned, I would probably...
I'd love to see that.
I would probably jump first with the floaters.
I have to apologize because I haven't actually seen the movie. But obviously, there's a famous scene, right? And for some reason, I'm just picturing you in that scene where they stand at the front of the boat. I don't know which one you are. Not that it matters. Yes. You know what?
Just put the Celine Dion song on. I'll be any of them. I don't mind.
Speaking about the Titanic example anyway, so women and children were rescued first, right? Is that how it went? Okay. Masculinity, femininity, all this stuff aside, how does that play out any different in any sort of society?
You got to ask that again. Sorry, I missed that.
So you've got men, women, and children on this sinking ship.
Yeah.
Now, it's decided that the men are going to protect or rescue the women and children first. Whether it's decided or whether it's just a subconscious thing. In what way could that possibly play out any different? Now, what would you do different if it was yourself?
Okay. Well, I mean, should it not be based on who's got more value to society? I mean, this is a philosophical question. This is an ethical question. And when you study, ethics, there are such examples they give where you've got a boat of people and you've got various characters within that boat. For example, somebody has an idea within them that could save 1 million people, yet they're 1 week from dying. Would you save them? Would you not? Somebody is 70 and, somebody's a child, and there's various positions that are given, and it's the case of, who, I mean, even before answering that question, why not try to save everyone, right? That's like...
Okay, so obviously, look, the intention is always to try and save everyone, yeah?
Yeah.
Now...
So what I'm questioning, though, is what gave the notion, from what value do we suggest that actually women and children should be saved first? What's the value system that suggests that?
That's
the value system that suggests that is that they are more vulnerable.
Okay, it's that, and it's also who is doing the saving. It's the man, isn't it? And the man traditionally is the protector. That's how it's seen. Say you've got, I don't know, say you're out in like a playground or a park or a picnic with your siblings or your friends, yeah? Now, you've got your sisters who are, let's say they've failed their GCSEs and, they're on the dole or whatever, for example. And then you've got your brother who is, I don't know, a GP or a brain surgeon. Now, at that point, are you really thinking who to protect first based on their value in society? Or are you thinking, look, I've got to make sure the kids are okay. I've got to protect my sister. My brother can, maybe protect himself or fend for himself. I've never sort of imagined a scenario where you'd think, okay, who do I protect first based on, what they contribute to society or what their value is or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way of looking at it. I mean, I'm not suggesting that should be the framework. I'm suggesting that's an alternative framework.
Okay.
But the framework of women should be saved first is the one I'm questioning. And what that does, the reason why I'm questioning is, what does that mean to men? So, for example, we know that more men are killed by men than women are killed by men. right? So this notion that women are suffering more by men than men are suffering by men is not right. But we do know that women are suffering at the hands of men, but there's an element of that suffering that ignores the impact that it does to other men also, right? So when we, for example, send people out to war, things are changing. We know that. We're in a day and age where things are changing and evolving. But when people go out to war, the notion is that men go out to war, women protect within the home. Okay, when there's a battle, you go out there. Things are changing. The terrain is changing.
Should it? Does it need to?
Well, and the societies themselves are evolving and becoming less dangerous, the need for that toughness is diminishing. But to help society, you want to have both men and women able to protect themselves. So if you're going to question how society sees protectiveness, then maybe we need to invite both our daughters and our sons to participate in self-defense classes, because who said that men have a commodity over protection? And there are going to invariably be times where your daughters and your sisters will not have a chaperone.
Rizwan, do you feel that the term masculinity has evolved over time? If so, how?
Well, masculinity is a very broad term, and what's happened is now you've got adjectives to explain the masculinity. Toxic masculinity is typically seen as someone who exhibits certain qualities suggested to be typical to the type of male who is, again, this is a term that's been drawn out by certain feminist movements. I personally do not favor the term toxic masculinity. I think it's just it's just essentially toxic behavior. It's toxic humans. And there is a pattern, however, of behavior around men who think, right, I'm a man, so I deserve to have more attention in this conversation. I'm a man, so I'm going to be more rational. Or I'm a man, so I'm going to have all of these things. And that's not necessarily a good way of looking at it. I think masculinity, in my opinion, going back before, is a type of behavior accessible to both men and women. I think it's becoming more and more a redundant term because it's associated behavior with just men. What we've got to look at is, what does it mean to be a healthy man? Are men misunderstood? So the question, are men misunderstood, is a different line of inquiry than is masculinity misunderstood. I don't want to synonymize the two. I don't want to say that the two are equated, because they're not. They're two very distinct things. Men are misunderstood, is what I would say.
Do you think men are more misunderstood than women are?
It's hard to say. It doesn't really matter. The point is, men are misunderstood. We're talking about men. And I think when it comes to the notion of, one of the things I do not do is I do not encourage men to share their feelings without creating a space for them to do that, for example. Because as a society, you're placing way too much emphasis on the individual to nurture themselves by being vulnerable, by giving their vulnerabilities away. But where is the places where that would be accepted? So we can't encourage men to evolve without actually placing a responsibility on societal structures to capture that evolution. Because what if there's people like us who are from our communities? Where can we afford to go to and actually say, you know what, I've messed up in X, Y, and Z, and I would like some support. There are mistakes I've made, horrible mistakes in life.
We all do, yeah.
To go somewhere where I'm not going to be judged, I'm not going to be ridiculed, I'm not going to be saved, but just to be able to have a space to share, to be witnessed, and say, right, this is where you're at, and I trust you that you're going to work your way out of it, but as a community, we'll be there for you. And so I think men are beginning to change their ideas around what it means to be a male, what it means to be myself, what it means to be man. And what I encourage is move away from socially sanctioned ideas of what it means to be a man and move towards what's true to you. For a period of time, you may be a lot more warrior-esque. I know that up until my 30s, I was very much a warrior in my career, very ambitious, taking huge amount of risks. The last 10 years through life experiences, I've spent huge amount on nurturing myself. You would call it the feminine energy. I would call it the anima. But having said that, I went on a retreat over the weekend, and one of the things that became very pronounced to my psyche, to my awareness, was that my warrior has become deflated somewhat. And so my warrior energy now, knowing that, okay, what is the warrior? Many of us are falling into the shadow warrior anyway, the warrior that hurts others. The warrior is supposed to protect. The warrior is deeply nurturing. The warrior is deeply loving. My warrior was deflated.
Did it work for you for the first 30 years?
It did work for me, yes, 100%. But it cost me relationships, because I was so ambitious to get to the top, and I was climbing up there, that it took certain external factors to knock me down. And for 10 years, I went into myself to see, what do I need to do to, like, very introspective, very much my spiritual journey began in a very different way. But I'm now able to marry the two together again. You know, the notion of what I'm introspective about and what I'm actually able to actually push and take those risks and make those changes that need to be made.
Tuff is asking the question, it would be good to hear your views about the alpha male and sigma male.
Sigma male, I've not heard that term. What is sigma male? I mean, alpha male is this notion of the first male, the first one, the first archetype, the one from which, you know, the leader of the pack, the one from which everybody turns to. I mean, I think that's a redundant term now. You know, it's what is strength in today's day and age?
Would that not depend on the culture or the environment you're in?
Yeah, but how many of us have intersectionality with cultures? We're not always in one culture anymore.
Yeah.
We're weaving in between different cultures. And so to be able to do that, it's really important to recognize actually what is it of myself that's being true. Because look, what does it mean to be a man? Arguably is the same question, what does it mean to be a woman? And arguably the central question behind those two questions is, who am I?
100%. Yeah.
And so to answer the question, who am I, you can answer it in two ways. The first way is you can answer it as though you are a defined being that achieves things. So I am a father because I've got 3 sons. I am somebody who was a teacher. I am somebody who loves me. So we're talking about the things that we love, or the things that we've achieved, right? But actually, one thing we know for a fact, above everything else, is that every single one of us is unique. There's never going to be another Majid, right? There's never going to be another Majid. There was never one before you. There's not any other one right now. And there will never be another one after this. They could have the same clothes as you. They could have the same glasses as you. They could have the same style beard as you, but it's not you. You're unique.
Won't be the same mustache.
I'm seeing mine's growing. Right? And so with that in mind, it's very important to recognize that in terms of the notion of who am I, actually the question isn't who am I? You can never answer that. The question is, who am I not?
That's a good question.
I'll tell you where I see this going wrong is...
What's going wrong?
This whole who am I, how am I, what am I not? It makes for a very, very messy society. And I don't want to give this whole LGBTQ WTF whole situation as an example, but that's the kind of doors that you open up. So I guess my question here is, and in my head it's a fairly simple question, is that man being masculine and woman being feminine has worked. It's worked for
define work.
Centuries, many centuries. Okay.
Let's just see if it's worked. Men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide above women. Yes. Men are more likely to be in prison for life above women.
Yes.
Men are more likely to be killed by other men in the
Yes.
society that we're living in.
Yeah.
So how is it that this notion of what we're suggesting as
Okay.
masculine men, feminine women is working?
Yeah. So obviously the stats that you've just given us, how far back do they go?
This is what, 2-3 years ago.
Okay. So if we go 20, 30 years ago, or 60, 70 years ago, or maybe 100, 150 years ago, you know, what were the suicide rates in comparison?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. It's just a theory. Obviously, I haven't actually looked into this particularly either, but it's the fact that you said it, and I'm thinking that is the problem. Men not being men and not understanding their masculine nature and not sticking to that and their sort of purpose and reasons for life is why they're lost, they're confused, they're depressed, they're suicidal, they're sort of searching for identities, then they're questioning their entire existence, their sexuality, their femininity, and it just goes on and on. So the reason I say it's worked is because from what we know of, history and scriptures and everything else, men were masculine. They were hunter-gatherers. They were providers. They were protectors. Suicide has become an issue when? How recent? Depression and sort of all of this stuff has come about when? What came about just before suicide rates and depression rates and all of these other things became highlighted and were a concern?
Okay, so you've said a lot there, which is really important to try and unpack it as much as possible. So
yeah,
you cannot ignore the man who kills himself when he leaves a message behind. And typically, if you just pick up any place that does work for men around tackling suicide, especially those who have attempted suicide, etc., some of the main things they talk about is that there was no place for them to go.
Yeah.
One of the interventions in place is that create spaces for men to be able to talk. Create spaces for men to be able to be listened. Okay. Create spaces for men to be able to in the last if you think about post World War II, capitalism went on overdrive, and the American empire just grew and plummeted, and hugely the notion of Americanism spread across the world, and consumerism just went, and technology boomed. And with all of that, for capitalism to thrive, an individual has to think primarily for themselves. So in that competitive thread that capitalism rests itself on, you take competition out of capitalism, it's fallen apart. To compete, the man has to compete with the man next door to him. He's competing, as opposed to a different economic system where men were supporting each other. Men and women were supporting each other economically, having a bigger buying power, and then saying that actually whatever's available now, you do that. The small dog is basically eaten up by the bigger dog on the market itself. So that's a big factor that's led men to on the road of trying to fight through and survive and grow, and this notion of the American dream, which we kind of are, although we don't know it as the American dream, what we think is, I'm going to become a millionaire next year. That's that drive of doing that, stepping on other people's toes, winning by others losing. That binary narrative is something that does weigh heavy on us, because what does it lose? I'll tell you what it loses. If I'm competing against you guys, I won't go to you when I need help. Okay? I won't go to you when I need help. And if I can't go to you when I need help, what I've lost is my community. Now, it's very interesting. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we as humans, he suggests that we have certain hierarchy of needs. Things like food, security, love,
sense of belonging.
And what he suggests then is that the highest hierarchy is the hierarchy of self-actualization. That once you self-actualize, meaning you become yourself, all of that happens once all of these needs are met. but there's a very important thing and a thread. Remember, these are people who have been referred to shape education policy, to shape social policy, to suggest that how do we develop society? Well, we develop society by meeting their material needs, right? Let's have a think. The notion that people in other parts of the world who are maybe living in a hut, who are maybe, you know, having a few goats, that they maybe cannot read or write, the notion that they have a worse life to us because we somehow have a greater GDP as a comparison to suggest that because we earn more, we're better is a false comparison.
Do you not find that's a different topic, though? How does that even relate to masculinity?
The way it relates is this: is that masculinity today is being seen as the way I am trying to progress in life, right? So the lack of masculinity suggests that you're not progressing. So masculinity, the qualities of going out there, throwing your seed everywhere, taking all of those, that's the quality of moving into the unknown. These are brilliant.
I've never, to be honest with you, I've never attributed those qualities to masculinity like that.
How have you attributed it?
I mean, it does, irrespective of which other, loads of attributes, obviously, but what you've just described, I've never attributed them to be exclusively towards, attributes exclusively towards masculinity. I mean, these are either you're ambitious or you're not. To me personally, that's just the way I see it, irrespective of whether it's a masculine trait or feminine trait, how people perceive them to be. Me personally, I wouldn't attribute them to be masculine traits per se.
Well, I think maybe the confusion you're having is that, remember, masculinity is not a male trait. So
it's because you mentioned, I think you said that. No, whether it is okay, whether it is or not, I think it's because you related it that way in the discussion.
Yeah. So
that's where I made the link.
Yeah. So what I'm relating is that men have shown more masculinity. The foundation of this conversation first sits on the idea that there are certain qualities that we call masculine, which are the ones that men are seen. So if for example, we know that men are supposed to be seen. Like you were suggesting, Khan, you go out there, the man's out there, he does his thing, he expresses himself out in the world, he's seen. The woman actually, she's in the home, she's nurturing the home, that's what she's doing. What I'm suggesting is both of these qualities are good when they're found in men and women. So if we were to continue to use the term masculinity, femininity, we will get confused, like we're getting, like maybe
to be seen. Did you say these qualities to be seen, whether they're found in men and women are good?
To be seen is good, yes, because you're out in your community, you're progressing, you're getting out there. You're not just withdrawn within your own home. When life comes, your life goes into the unknown. You're not just stuck in your own little place and just nurturing that thing itself. But these qualities of going out there, if we take away the label of masculinity and say, what does it mean to be a healthy man? Well, a healthy man is a man who's good at home, nurturing within the home, and is also able to protect his family when danger comes. But at the same time, he's able to push himself and take risks and go out there and be the individual who stands up and is confident with who he is and what he believes in, because he doesn't run away from danger. So the qualities that are seen to be masculine are healthy. They're not unhealthy qualities. They can become unhealthy when there are qualities that are in absence in that particular person, or when you overly use them. Going back to the example I was giving, Maslow's hierarchy was actually appropriated. He took it from a Native American, Blackfoot, who actually said the first quality, the first need we as humans have is the need to be me, to be authentic, to self-actualize. That's your first need above everything else. You might not have food, you might not have shelter. Those things are secondary. They do not play a part in you from being unconscious, from not having consciousness when you're a child, a baby, to attaining consciousness. Your fight is to be you. That's the first evolutionary fight. And then once your personal drive to be me is met, then the community is met. The community needs then come about. So what we're missing though, is we're trying to achieve what it means to be a man by some socially sanctioned ideas in whatever cultural mix you want to talk about, which is essentially robbing us of who we are. It's essentially robbing me of the intuition of who I am. So the question of who I am is not something you can answer for me. It's not a book can't tell me who I am. I know who I am. And I know who I am when I'm living into the unknown, but also recuperating in the known. So I have to be able to nurture myself and be emotionally intelligent. Research now, 100 years ago, we didn't have emotional intelligence as a concept that was heavily researched, and studies were done about how important it is to regulate your emotions. That when you're feeling something, how do you regulate them? So as humans now, look, if we do not have a structure amongst us that allows us to say, hang on a second, this is about us supporting you to help you regulate your emotions right now, then what's going to happen is you will take on the responsibility yourself. So many men have taken on the responsibility of regulating their emotions on their own. Whereas women, on the other hand, there are a lot more circles available for women. Still more has to be done. It's a brilliant quality to have, to be able to go and just offload. But when men do that, what is it seen as? Oh, you're being a woman, or you're being a fag, or you're being a gay. These derogative terms are used, or they're used in a derogative way to suggest that actually you're being less of a man. What I'm suggesting is that the qualities that define us are the qualities that we need in that moment. We shouldn't be locked into something and think that I'm always going to be a risk taker, and when I stop being that, I'm becoming less of a man, and there's something that's going to be wrong with me. Of course, certain traumas do lock us into certain behaviors. Some men will become, like for the last 10 years, I would argue that I locked myself through certain traumatic experiences into certain behaviors. When you become aware of them, you're able to then say, okay, so over this weekend, big aha moment for me was my warrior has been deflated. Like I had that warrior for 30 years. Through life's experiences, we had to be that warrior, get out there, fight, learn how to protect myself, all of these things, take risks, put my life on the line for certain things. But what happened the last 10 years? I was trying to regulate myself. I was trying to, but I was doing it all on my own. I wasn't doing it with the community. I wasn't doing it with people that would support it. So it's about creating a community that allows individuals to come as they are, come as you are. That's all it is. Come as you are. And trusting that when we're talking, that if you right now think I need to be tough to get through this moment, that's your way of getting through it. That's fine.
I'm just, you know what, I just get confused why even the terms masculine or feminine even have to be used in such circumstances sometimes.
I agree. That's
for me, a lot of this has to do with your strengths, your weaknesses, your unique attributes, and how to tread through life. And for me, it makes no difference whether the term masculine and feminine is used. And oftentimes I feel that it's overly used. Some of these terms are. I mean, let me ask you the question. We hear the word feminism as well on the other side of the coin. Do you think that played a role in how men see themselves? Feminism.
Okay, so look, feminism in the modern structures that we see before us is a very different term to the notion or the very definition of what it means to be a feminist. We know that feminism first came about by white women coming forward and saying that they wanted to have a vote. And it was only like 40, 50 years later, take for example, America as an example, which shows that Black and Native American women got the vote 50, 60 years later. So feminism wasn't about women, it was about white women. It's very important. And then you got different waves of feminism that came about. And what were those about? It was about white women wanting to be closer to the structures of power that were held by white men. Now, what's happened is over time is feminism has come about and it's become a movement, so to speak, but it's ignored completely the individual, the men who are also being broken down by power structures. Whether you call those power structures patriarchy or not is a separate thing altogether, male-centric structures around power. But what we do know is that men are suffering in our own ways through power imbalances. If you do not have a network that you can rely on, you lose your job, you're gone, you're finished. You'll be out on the street, 2 paychecks away, and that's it. Nobody's going to pay your mortgage, nobody's going to do that. So the number of men that are suffering from this, I would say, are ignored by feminism. And feminism is creating a balance of the woman should be recognized. And absolutely, I believe in life, a woman and a man should have access to whatever they want to have access to, and they should do that. And to be able to be supported to do that.
Where does this stop then? Where's the sort of line?
Why does it need to stop?
It needs to stop. I'll tell you why it needs to stop is because society is a mess.
Yeah.
It's broken. It's just destroyed.
But it was a mess before.
People don't know if they're a man, woman, or a microwave. You could be a lamp because that's how you want to refer to yourself as and identify and all of this stuff. If we go back, and I know we didn't really get an answer for it. I don't know if we're going to get an answer for it, but it's something to think about. We go back before all this notion of be what you want to be and identify what you want to identify and connect with your feminine side and everything else. Let's simplify it somewhat. You're a man. You are going to be 90 to 95% masculine or masculine traits. Yeah, you can cry, you can hug your kids. There's nothing to say that masculinity means you can't play with kids or you can't buy your wife flowers. It's not, that's just silly. That's some kind of weird definition of masculinity. And a woman, the same, 90, 95%, 98% gonna have feminine traits. Otherwise, you end up with what you have today, is men not being men anymore, and they just want to break down and cry and lose the plot and forget what they're about, and subsequent suicides and homosexualities and bestialities and pedophilia and 99 genders.
You're making a lot of jumps there, and I've got to interject.
I don't think it's a jump. I think we've only had problems in recent years when we've had all such weird influences from the West and everything else that women can be manly too and men can be womanly and all of this other stuff.
Let's take, for example, the country which has got the most porn searches in the world. One of them is Pakistan.
Yes.
What influence is the West having there right now? Bestiality as a thing was something that wasn't a Western notion. You
don't think the West has an influence on Pakistan?
No, it has an influence on Pakistan, but why is
it has a massive influence on Pakistan? So
what is so are you blaming the West for what is happening in Pakistan right now?
I'm blaming the stepping away from who you are, what you are, and how you were created. If you were made man, you should be predominantly masculine. It's not old-fashioned, and I think masculinity is under attack.
Because why do you define masculine? Because I'd like to know. Because when you compared feminine, the example you used were give flowers to your wife and hug your children, and that's how you said feminine. And then masculine, I would like to know what you mean by masculine.
So what I said by giving flowers to your wife, it doesn't make you any less masculine. It's not anything wrong with that. But the truth is, look, the basis
giving flowers,
of masculinity.
How is that a feminine trait anyway?
Why?
How is the act of giving flowers a feminine trait anyway? Is the point? Surely, when you give flowers, you've got a purpose.
It's not a feminine trait. That's the whole point. So let's go back to being hunter-gatherer. Let's go back to being protector. Let's go back to being head of the household.
Let's make it real. What does masculine, a healthy masculine? So you're saying man should be 95% masculine. Tell me what it looks like.
I have no reason to believe today should be any different from 100,
so tell me
1,000 years ago.
Describe it. Describe the qualities that make masculinity.
Masculinity
that are exclusive to men, that you believe should be exclusive to men, and women should be 95% feminine, because that's the crux of the
Yeah.
of the conversation here. Tell me what are the qualities that, in your opinion, are exclusive or should be exclusively for men?
Leaders,
Okay.
protectors, providers, strength. These are the
A woman shouldn't be strong.
Of course, a woman should be strong.
A woman shouldn't protect her. So, what if a woman's husband died? Who's going to protect her kids?
See, now that's an exception to the rule. If a husband doesn't die, who protects her kids?
Okay, so a woman, 20 years, her husband's been protecting the kids. He suddenly dies. Where's she going to learn how to protect the kids now?
Why does he have to die? Okay,
I'm giving an example. These are real examples. Or a woman's husband, he leaves her, divorces her.
Yeah.
So who's going to protect the kids then?
The community. This stuff has to happen. I get it. But he hasn't died. He hasn't died. Why do you have to kill someone? Let's imagine they're alive. Let's imagine there's a husband and a wife. Now, for the 20 years in your own given example, he's done everything. It's only when he's died that now she has to fill in. Correct?
Okay.
Now, I don't see the reason or the need for that to play out in any other way. Okay.
No, so what happens then? Look, the number of situations where, because we're theorizing here, whereas what you're suggesting is a theory that all men should be a certain way. What I'm suggesting is men and women should have access to all qualities that are available to humans. And that's
I think, sorry, just
show that. Everything shows. I've seen women who are actually a lot more masculine than men. I've seen men who are a lot more feminine than women, meaning some of the most nurturing people I know are men. Some of the most ambitious, strong, intelligent people that I know are women. So it's how do you actually suggest that this imbalance is in any shape or form?
Okay, let's speak about oscillation. Now, you said you can oscillate between masculine and feminine qualities.
Yeah.
Do you believe that's a 50-50 for men and women?
I believe it's whatever circumstance you need. So, for example, if a mother passes away and the father is the primary caregiver of his children, then he has to be able to believe. My point is this.
Let's say nobody passes away. Let's say everybody's fit and healthy.
No, you can't do that. Look,
why not?
Because to oscillate, what I'm suggesting is contextual.
Okay.
You can't take the context out. So I'm saying that I'm giving an example that when something happens, you have to be able to believe. My belief is we can access it. Now, two examples. Example number one, the man, his wife passes away. He thinks a woman should be the nurturing one. I can't be the nurturing one. So he abandons his children, or he's neglectful towards his children because he's like, this isn't my thing. I don't know how to raise kids. What are you talking about? I'm supposed to be going out there working. That's what I did for you, and that's all I can do to the kids. What he's going to think is that to learn nurture is an extrinsic endeavor.
It's funny you say that because the most of the time, the men that are abandoning their children fail to be masculine.
No, let me just finish this point, because again, you're mentioning a counterpoint that's not related. I'm saying that, do you believe that when you need to protect your children, so two examples, two men, first man believes that the woman is the primary caregiver, his wife's passed away, so now he thinks, where am I going to learn how to caregive? I'm going to have to do what a woman does. So he's now in conflict, because against your definition, he thinks I'm being a woman now, so he's in conflict with who he is. The other man believes these are qualities that are accessible to all of us, so all he's saying is, right now, I need to be caring. Right now, I'm not any less of a man if I'm caring. That's all I'm saying. So
I don't think that
you
fits.
move with your example. You move with the times. When that same man steps out his door and a lion is coming, or a dog is coming, or an attacker is coming, he can't be like, here's some flowers, let's sing Kumbaya. No, you need to hit hard in that moment. You need to be able to have that fight in you in that moment.
Why can't she have the fight?
Of course she should as well.
Why is she not protecting you? Why are you not, why are you not showing your feminine side and hiding behind your masculine protector of a wife?
Behind? Who says feminine hides behind?
Okay, so in your instance, when the dogs come, why is he risen?
No, the example I gave was when a man his wife has passed away. But even if you look at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were women.
You gotta kill people, man. Let everybody live.
In the time of the Prophet, there were women in Makkah who were in an economy which was where men would go out and they would earn through caravans. The economy,
how many men didn't go to battle?
Listen, the economy system in Medina was different, where the women and men would go out to the fields collectively and work. The women of Medina would mock the women of Makkah, saying, "We fight with our men, whereas you guys just beat the drums and nurse the men." You had women from Medina with spears who were able to fight, famous women in Islam who would actually learn to fight. Khawla, a famous example of a woman who was actually, people mistook her to be Khalid ibn Walid. That's how ferocious she fought. Is that an anomaly? Or is that a woman who was living truly to who she was in that moment in time? Because she's in the battle, she had to fight. So what
is it an anomaly? Yes.
Where I agree with you is we have a lot of battles. And what as men we must not do is forego our masculinity or our strength and our risk-taking and nurture the inner self. We shouldn't be at the expense of it. I'm a lived example right now of 10 years of trying to nurture myself, and suddenly it dawned on me, hang on a second, a lot of my issues over the last 10 years were because that warrior spirit was actually depleting and it was slowly deflating. And that apparent realization meant...
Did you believe in those first 30 years that you can't hug your children? You have to be ambitious and driven all the time?
No, not at all.
So what was the problem
with
the way that you were?
The first 30 years were a problem. The suggestion I'm making is that the warrior element of within me deflated and the nurturing side of me grew, but that imbalance, I'm seeing it in a much more of a pronounced way now, right in front of me, that what's happened is there's got to still retain a strong warrior. Because what happens is when we become community focused, when we become people who are like, we've got to nurture ourselves. The spiritual path is a very, very nurturing path. The path to Allah is a path away from the known. It's a path into the unknown. You can't be the warrior with your heart. You have to be the lover with your heart. So the realization for me is that I became somewhat locked into one, and the last 10 years I've spent nurturing that inner exploration, but actually my warrior energy was deflated. And now that realization has come that, that's what was happening, because things don't become apparent to us. And that now that it's become apparent to me, what I've learned from my own experience, and at least observably, is life is such we shouldn't get locked into one of them. We must be able to oscillate. What you're describing here, two things I picked from yourself that I agree with you. Number one is society is brutal. So don't you dare let go of the qualities that prepare you for that society when you meet that society. Two is the realization that actually, as individuals, and this is where I agree, retaining those qualities when you're out there and maintaining the qualities of nurture when you're within your own home, there's no contradiction between the two. You're wrapping that all as masculinity, but what I would urge you to consider is actually what you're describing is elements that is the nurturing side of things, the loving side of things, the grateful side of things. Like gratitude is to be able to just sit with yourself and say, I'm okay as I am right now. It's that healing energy. To be able to give your children that space, to be able to give your loved ones that space, to be able to give yourself that space is a quality that I'm sure you've accessed in your life. You know, I'm okay. You're grateful. You sit after prayer. You sit in the mornings. You sit whenever. You do your dhikr. You say alhamdulillah. You do these things. And what you realize is actually there is so much that I am okay with. It's that inner journey. What we're measured against is not that, because that's immeasurable. What men are measured against is how many companies have you formed, how many OBEs have you got? Or if you can get, I don't know, whatever, right? Those are the...
See, you mentioned earlier that the guy who's the CEO and earning millions, is more masculine than the guy that lives in the hut that has goats. Okay, so there's an example. You gave an example of someone who lives in a hut and he has goats and cattle and maybe on a mountaintop. Bro, that dude is more masculine than any suit wearer in...
You're actually making the same point as me. What I was saying was the men in those parts of the world, who's to say that they are any less than the men in this part of the world who may apparently have succeeded more materially? That's the point I was making. That materially, measurably, this person has a 200 or £1 million house. That person has a 4 walls, a hut, and a little oven in the back. Who's to suggest who's more of a man materially? So in this circle, materialism probably doesn't trigger much thought about whether one person is more of a man or not. But in the common circles that you see around, and how youngsters right now, what does it mean to be a man? The Instagram world, the TikTok world, what is it all about? It's about what I'm going to show you I have. Can you like the fact that I'm in front of a Ferrari? Can you like the fact that I've got the latest watches and I've got the best, bags and the designer wears? These are all about being seen and validated, qualities that are not healthy, unhealthy qualities that both men and women are showing. So it's about stepping back and realizing these material, if you take the material dimension away, you have a much more healthier idea of being a masculine. Now, sometimes in life, through context, through your own responsibilities, you're having to show a lot more of those qualities of going out there and having that warrior energy. And I'm saying that's perfectly fine because that's what's right for you. But
it might be the woman who has the warrior energy or wears the pants in the house. Is that what you're saying? And that's fine, yeah?
Well, what I'm saying is the notion of wearing pants is, again, suggesting that she's being a man. Because that's what it suggests. That's what it's
yes, exactly. And that's what I'm saying.
If it's truly 50-50, sorry.
No, it's not 50-50. I'm not saying that's the case.
Well, let's go by this whole oscillating, example. And you gave the example of the one woman that fought alongside the Sahaba, whether she was an anomaly or not.
No, not one woman, many women.
It was not anywhere close to 50-50. I mean, I've not heard, and not that I'm learned, but
that's an irrelevant point.
I'm not aware of any Sahabas that were homemakers or more, oscillated more towards the feminine traits, or what I would refer to as feminine traits, and stayed home while their wives were what I would refer to as masculine traits. I mean, I can't think of any one such example.
But why are you suggesting that? Who's suggesting that that's actually what should happen? I mean, there might be cases where a man can't work and he's going to be looking after the children, which happens.
Yeah.
And that's okay if that happens. But who's suggesting
that is okay? Look, without killing people, without handicapping people, without sort of, any of the, let's think positive, yeah? The husband and wife are healthy. The husband is the protector and the provider, and all of the what I would refer to as masculine stuff. And the woman is, the more nurturer. She's maybe more empathetic and more caring. It works. It doesn't just, it's not a case study of over a few years of whether it's worked or not. It's worked for thousands of years.
What works? What are you saying?
When did it stop working?
What are you saying it works? Because I think that's a very overly simplistic way of looking at society.
It is that simple.
It works. What's it?
Okay, so men being masculine, men being providers, hunter-gatherers, demand not just the presence, but being strong in both in their voice and their opinion and their leadership, and all the sort of qualities and characteristics. That works.
What when you say works for what? What define works?
Works for everything. Works for home. Works for relationship. Works for upbringing of children. Works for society. Where does it not work?
So look, if you have a situation where one partner, in the example you're giving, is
bro, if you're gonna kill someone again,
is the one that you're suggesting, right?
Okay.
And the other partner is a lot more nurturing, and that's what works for them. That's what works for them. That may work for a lot of people.
I wouldn't encourage it though.
To suggest that that is the model by which you go by is actually contradictory. It's an antithesis to the essence of who we as individuals are. That if you're suggesting that the soul has a masculine and the soul has a feminine, and that men have a masculine soul and women have a feminine soul, then you're wrong. The soul has no gender. So the notion is that you are unique in your being, and we're saying that whatever circumstances demand of you, be true to those circumstances. And whether those circumstances
the chances of your soul or whatever being heterosexual or homosexual are just 50-50, right? And whichever way you feel inclined or want to go.
What are you suggesting that the soul is homosexual? What does that mean?
Okay, so if you're born male, you should seek guidance and advice and education, all the rest of it in order to be a man. You know how we say be a man
in order to be real. Look, from what you're sharing, it seems as though you've got an issue with the fact that if a man is able to move from certain qualities to other qualities, that somehow he's actually being less of a man. And you've asked a question which is quite offensive, that the soul is homosexual. I don't know where that's coming from, but you've got to be able to
it's coming from where you say be true to yourself.
Yeah. So when Allah,
what does that mean?
Allah, when the soul comes from Allah, we know it's come in a true state. It doesn't have gender is a social construct. Sex is a biological construct, right? You're born with it. You're a man, right? Now, the definition of what it means to be a man is what you're saying is an extrinsic, external definition. This is what a definition is. You're saying it's worked for time. It hasn't worked for time, right? It hasn't worked for time. What do you mean by it's worked for time? The wars that have happened, the poverty that's happened, the impoverishment that's happened. How do you mean it's worked for time? There are so many countless examples that it's not working. It's never worked. What we're talking about is a lived reality of you, me. When we're around our children, we're going to show them love. We're going to sit with them. We're going to play with them. When we're out there and a fighter's coming to fight us, we're going to protect ourselves. And if I had any daughters, I would nurture them to be able to protect themselves and fight for themselves too.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want my daughter to be waiting for some man to come to her and say, yeah, where's the man who's going to save me? What kind of nonsense is this? So to nurture men and women to be able to defend themselves is healthy. To nurture men and women to be able to cook is healthy. Now, if you've got a situation, for example, where the man is working and the woman isn't working, then you have a shared responsibility. You say, actually, would you like to cook? You somehow you fall into that as long as it's there. But
I think that the difference between sort of being 95% and 5% and or being 50-50 is huge. Look, there's nobody says, and I don't understand.
You're saying it's 50-50. I'm not saying it's 50-50.
In your case, it could be.
A person may well be 95 their whole life, and I'm saying that's okay. That's perfectly fine because that's what they needed. You need to actually listen because look, you're the host. You need to listen to what I'm saying. So what I'm saying to
but you seem to be saying the same thing over and over and over.
You've got to listen.
Okay, let me interject, lads, because hang on 1 second. Let me just split you up for a second. There we go. Right. So what I was going to suggest is this: we usually finish within 60 minutes of running this show, and we've gone 15 minutes over almost, and it's been a fascinating discussion. I've actually enjoyed being on the sideline, we're just watching you for a change and not doing much of the debating myself. And as you know what, it's been very educational, and it's also been very thought-provoking from both sides in terms of thinking of where they're actually coming from. Where is that thought stemming from? I have questions in my mind from both sides, and for me personally, although I'm in the middle between you two on the screen right now, I'm actually on the fence on either side of the argument as well. And I'll tell you why. Personally, I think these labels cause more problems than necessary. And, masculine, feminine, these labels themselves I think they've been overly used, and they've been brutalized, and they've been slapped all over places, and they've been taken advantage of in some situations, and they've been used to, gain whatever people gain from using them in a negative and a positive way.
Yeah.
Personally, I think there are certain qualities in us human beings, and to label them masculine and feminine, okay, comes from and will be heavily dependent on your version of the world, your education, your background, your environment, your culture, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes what we perceive to be wrong from one side may be totally fine with them. And it's like, it comes to the example of when America seems to feel that a lot of countries need to be democratized, they need democracy. And then they're like, hang on, we're all right as we are. So just leave us alone. And sometimes we use these terms and push them onto others or apply them onto others unnecessary. That's my personal opinion on all these things. And this is why the question that I asked in my group wasn't just masculinity, is it misunderstood? I also asked a secondary question. Is it overly thought about and used in ways that maybe people should think about for the future? So we've come to the end of the show right now, and I'd love to continue, but I think our audience has been very active as well today in giving their opinions and sharing their thoughts. We have some people who are going to follow up and watch back, but we have to come to a close right now. On before we do, though, just for the final thoughts. But I can hear myself back for some reason. I don't know why. I think maybe someone's got their phone on. Final thoughts before we leave. Razwan, brother, thank you very much for joining us. Before you leave and before we close wrap the show, how do young men start their journeys, given everything we've discussed, towards becoming better, let's just say, individuals?
Very good question. And going back to what I said in the beginning, I would say that remove the idea of what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine, remove those notions, and simply learn to trust your heart, because from the heart you connect with the divine, with Allah, and that is the way that you need to navigate through life. And actually, that's the first thing, is that fiercely trust your heart, but surround yourself with people who are supportive of that journey, as opposed to people that will not welcome your authenticity. There's a difference between people who will encourage you to be the best version of you and people who actually want you to be them. So surround yourself with people who are good for you, your community. And if you have got people that aren't good for you, then change who you are. Change the people not change who you are, change the people who are around you, but fundamentally trust who you are. And in that trusting of yourself, you'll realize that actually this is a time for me to show courage. This is a time for me to show forgiveness. You'll know yourself what you got to do. If you trust yourself, you'll honor the fact that actually you are an individual who is unique, and you're more true to the fitrah of how Allah has made you, how God has made you, which is that none of us are the same. So nobody can tell me how I can be me. Nobody can tell you how you can be you. So trust yourself and just learn to be around others who encourage you to trust yourself.
Thank you very much. Ali, do you have anything to say, or have you said it as you said enough?
No, to be fair, look, when you said debate, it was never meant to be a debate. It was more of a discussion.
A discussion, yeah, of course.
And to be fair, it's a healthy discussion. It's good to talk. Of course
it is, yeah, definitely.
The second it becomes sort of like maybe point scoring or something else, it has a slightly bitter taste. So, apologies if it come across like that. It really isn't. But my own sort of opinions and stuff on masculinity, I would say that if you sort of find that you're losing it or deflating or anything else, then get inflated. It's not. I don't believe it should be so open that you can just sort of ask yourself who you are, what you are, and regardless of what answer you come up with, roll with that. I think your identity, your culture, your theology, your everything else, your upbringing, your education has to sort of help keep you grounded. And if ever you sort of of forgetting who you are and decide to sort of be, making changes, drastic ones at that, then maybe go back a step.
Okay,
So
fantastic. Thank you very much for that. You know what? I've actually almost forgotten how to talk on our own podcast because I've been quiet for so long, and that's a very unusual thing for me. But Rizwan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Always enjoy listening to you and reading your posts on Facebook. If you're not following Rizwan, or just make sure you search him out and follow him. Has very interesting views, and shares a lot of value in all sorts of different ways, and always worth reading. Or we should always be reading and educating ourselves on different views, even if we don't agree with, because it's good to know. So Ali, thank you for being a great co-host.
It's all love, bro. It's all love.
So, no, I really enjoyed this. Maybe we should do it once. Maybe we should do it again sometime, inshallah. Ladies and gents, for now, that's it from us. And inshallah, we'll see you in the next episode. Tomorrow, actually, next episode may be deferred a week because of Eid. From what I remember, is it next week? Eid is probably next week, isn't
next
it?
week, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
so
not probably. It's
well, Eid is next week, but probably
we can have
on
a day
Tuesday.
difference, but we're not at the point where we can
possibly on a Tuesday, on the Tuesday when we normally broadcast our podcast. But other than that, we'll keep you informed. Stay connected, like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and join our group on Facebook on Beda's Media. If you're listening on any other platform, then just follow us, Majid Waris and Ali Controversial, as you can see, and also follow Rizwan Faraz at the same time. So from us for tonight, we're over.